There's a moment, a turning point, that separates the everyday empath from the empath who truly shapes realities. It's not when they're speaking. It's when they choose silence, when they intentionally stop talking, and what happens in that instant, what unleashes itself in the brain, in the neural networks, in the very chemistry of the body. Well, that was something Carl Jung intuited more than 100 years ago. But it's only now, in 2024, that Stanford, through the groundbreaking work of the Huberman Lab, has been able to prove it definitively. Have you ever noticed that when an empath goes quiet, something shifts in the room? That their silence somehow weighs more than the shouts of other people? This isn't just your imagination. This is actually hard neuroscience. And today, I'm going to reveal exactly why the empath's silence is more powerful than 1,000 words. And more importantly, I'm going to show you what Jung discovered about this power and how Dr. Andrew Huberman has scientifically validated every piece of that discovery. But before we continue, I need to warn you about something. What you're about to hear today might change the way you use your silence forever, because the vast majority of empaths are using silence in the wrong way. They become silent out of fear, out of exhaustion, out of simply not knowing what to say. But true silence, the silence that transforms, is something completely different. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Carl Jung was one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century. He created concepts that still guide psychology, therapy, and even modern neuroscience. But what few people realize is that Jung was a profoundly introverted man. Everyone who knew him attested to this. He preferred working alone. He recharged in solitude. He demanded silence when he was writing, and he had a private retreat in a place called Bollingen in Switzerland, where he spent long periods in complete silence. In 1921, Jung published a seminal book called Psychological Types. In this book, he mapped out, for the first time, the fundamental difference between introverts and extroverts. And what he said about the introvert changed everything we understand about the human mind. Jung wrote that there are two fundamental forms of adaptation in nature. One, through greater fertility, with relatively little defensive power. The other, through individual equipment, with multiple means of self-protection. The introvert, according to Jung, tends to defend themselves against external demands, to conserve themselves from any expenditure of energy directly related to the object, thus consolidating for themselves the safest and most impregnable position. And here is the key. The introvert's silence isn't weakness. It's a fortress, a strategic position that they assume to preserve their energy and their power. But wait, that was in 1921. How can we be sure that Jung was right? And this is where Huberman and modern neuroscience come in. A study published in 2024 in the journal Mindfulness, associated with Springer, investigated something fascinating. The researchers wanted to understand how the practice of silence affects brain connectivity. They analyzed functional magnetic resonance imaging data from 13 long-term Vipassana meditators. These meditators had, on average, 11,000 hours of lifetime meditation experience. They compared them with 34 healthy controls with no meditation experience, and also with a large data set from the Human Connectome project, with 169 participants. What they discovered was revolutionary. The practice of silence changes the connectivity between three fundamental cognitive networks: the default mode network, known as the DMN, the dorsal attention network, and the language network. In meditators who practiced silence, the connectivity between these networks was reduced, and this resulted in fewer spontaneous thoughts during meditation and a deeper experience of meditation. Think about what this means. When you practice silence consistently, your brain literally reconfigures itself. The verbal thoughts diminish, the mental chatter quiets down, and you enter a deeper state of consciousness. Jung knew this intuitively. He spent decades in silence in Bollingen because he understood that this was how he accessed the deepest layers of the psyche. Now, we have the scientific proof, but there's more. And this is something that Dr. Huberman explained. In his episode on the vagus nerve, there's a system in your body that constantly communicates between your brain and your organs. This system is dominated by the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve. The word vagus comes from vagabond, the one who wanders. And in fact, the vagus nerve is a vast and enormous collection of nerves that wander throughout your body. Dr. Huberman explained that there's something called interoceptive awareness. It's our perception of our internal landscape, things like our heart rate, our breathing, how full or empty our gut might be, but also our internal landscape in relation to chemistry, how acidic we feel, how good nor bad we feel inside. And here is the crucial point. Stress alters the chemistry of your gut because of the ways it shuts down the vagus nerve and silences the neurons that communicate from the gut to the brain. When you're stressed, your vagus nerve is basically silenced. You lose the connection with your body. You stop feeling your intuitions. You stop hearing the wisdom that comes from within. But the opposite is also true. When you choose silence consciously, you activate the vagus nerve. You reconnect brain and body. You amplify your interoceptive awareness. Huberman calls this interoceptive awareness. It used to be called vagal tone, but he prefers the term interoceptive awareness because it takes into account everything that's happening with the vagus nerve. Now, connect the dots, Jung said, that the introvert strengthens themselves in silence. Neuroscience proves that silence reduces the connectivity of brain networks associated with mental chatter. Huberman shows that silence activates the vagus nerve and amplifies interoceptive awareness, and empaths, by definition, are people with high interoceptive sensitivity. They feel what others feel. They perceive subtle changes in the environment. They process emotional information differently. When an empath enters silence, they aren't just stopping talking, they are activating an entire neurobiological system that amplifies their gifts. Their vagus nerve connects more strongly. Their interoception sharpens. Their language networks calm. And they enter a state of expanded perception that ordinary people simply cannot access. And that's why the empath's silence weighs so much. It's not just an absence of sound, it's a presence of something greater. It's the activation of a mode of perception that transcends words. But hold on, because what I'm about to reveal now is even more profound. Jung didn't just understand the power of silence, he understood that silence is the gateway to the unconscious. In his book, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung described how he entered states of active imagination. There's a pivotal moment that distinguishes the ordinary empath from one who shapes realities. It's not when they speak, but when they choose silence. This moment, triggering a cascade in the brain, neural networks, and body chemistry, was intuited by Carl Jung over a century ago. Now, in 2024, Stanford, through the Huberman Lab, has provided scientific validation. Have you ever noticed how a room shifts? When an empath falls silent, their silence carries more weight than others' shouts. This isn't mere imagination, it's neuroscience. This video will reveal why an empath's silence is more potent than 1,000 words. More importantly, we'll explore Jung's insights into this power and how Huberman's work scientifically corroborates each aspect of this discovery. Prepare yourself. What you're about to hear might forever alter how you perceive and utilize your own silence. Because most empaths misuse silence. They retreat into it out of fear, exhaustion, uncertainty. But true silence, the transformative silence, is something entirely different, and that's our focus today. He would sit in silence, let his mind wander, and allow images to emerge from the unconscious. He said that's how he accessed what he called the collective unconscious, the deepest layers of the psyche that connect all human beings. Now, let's look at what neuroscience has discovered. In 2025, researchers published a study in Network Neuroscience, a journal from MIT Press, about brain states during advanced concentrative meditation. They used 7 Tesla MRI, the most powerful available, and they identified 3 distinct brain states during deep meditation. The first was a state anti-correlated with the default mode network. In this state, the DMN was suppressed, while other networks were active. The second was a hyperconnected state, where many brain regions communicated simultaneously. The third was a sparsely connected state, with minimal communication between regions. The researchers found that the anti-correlated state with the DMN was more prevalent during meditation than during control states. And meditators who practiced silence showed reduced connectivity between the DMN and language regions. This reflects the decrease in spontaneous verbal thought. Jung called this silencing the ego. The DMN is frequently associated with the ego, the sense of self, the narrative we tell about ourselves. When you practice silence, you silence the DMN. You silence the ego. And this allows you to access what Jung called the self, with a capital S, the deepest center of the psyche that transcends the individual ego. Huberman never cited Jung directly in his episodes, but he described exactly the same mechanisms. Using neuroscientific language, he talked about how the autonomic nervous system has 2 branches: the sympathetic, which controls states of alertness from normal wakefulness to full panic attack, and the parasympathetic, which controls states of calm from relaxation to deep sleep. They function like a seesaw, always both active, just in different balances. The vagus nerve is classified as parasympathetic, but Huberman made an important distinction. Even though it's in the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, the vagus nerve is not a calming system. It's a communication system. It's a motor system. It communicates brain to body and body to brain, and it changes the function of different organs. This is exactly what Jung was describing when he talked about the connection between psyche and soma, between mind and body. He intuited that there was a system that connected our mental states to our bodily states, that our emotions weren't just in the head, but were felt throughout the body. The vagus nerve is that connection. And here's something that almost no one talks about. Jung described a psychological type that he called the sentimental introvert. This type corresponds to solitary people who have great difficulty establishing social relationships with other people. They can be unsociable and melancholic. They do everything in their power to go unnoticed and like to remain silent. However, they are very sensitive to the needs of others. Read that again. They are very sensitive to the needs of others. Jung was describing empaths more than 100 years ago. He identified this type of person who prefers silence but is extremely sensitive to others. He didn't use the word empath because it didn't exist at that time, but he mapped exactly the same characteristics. And now we understand why silence is so powerful for this type of person, because silence isn't escape, it isn't avoidance, it's the natural habitat of the empath. It's where they strengthen themselves, where their nervous system regulates, where their interoceptive awareness amplifies, where they access their true wisdom. But hold on to that information, because I'm going to come back to it later. Because there's an aspect of silence that Jung discovered that will make all of this make even more sense. Before that, I need to show you something that Huberman revealed about the connection between silence and emotional healing. In his lab at Stanford, he studies how the brain processes trauma and stress. And one of the most impressive discoveries is that silence activates healing mechanisms that simply don't work when we're talking or listening. When you talk, you're using energy. Your brain is processing language, organizing thoughts, monitoring reactions. When you listen, you're still processing, still responding internally. But when you're in true silence, without talking, and without preparing to speak, something different happens. Your brain enters a deeper processing mode. The areas related to memory and emotion become more active, and this allows unprocessed experiences to finally be integrated. Jung described this in another way. He said that in silence, contents of the unconscious can emerge into consciousness. Dreams, memories, symbolic images, all of this needs silence to appear, because constant noise, both external and internal, keeps these things repressed. Silence is the door, and the empath who learns to use this door has access to layers of themselves that most people never know. There's a 2024 study published in the Science Times that showed something fascinating about neuroplasticity. Researchers discovered that even personality traits previously considered fixed are actually modifiable. Introverts can learn social confidence. The chronically anxious can cultivate inner peace. And this happens through practices that involve silence and introspection. The brain remodels itself, new connections form, old patterns dissolve. This means that the empath's silence isn't just a pause, it's an active transformation practice. Each moment of conscious silence is literally remodeling the brain, creating new possibilities, opening paths that were previously closed. Let me tell you something that changed my perspective on this. Huberman explained that when you inhale, your heart accelerates. When you exhale, your heart decelerates. This happens because the brain sends information via the vagus nerve back to the heart to slow it down. So, while inhalations accelerate the heart, exhalations decelerate the heart. He taught a technique called the physiological sigh. 2 inhalations followed by a long exhalation. This activates the parasympathetic system and calms the nervous system almost instantly. This is what empaths are doing intuitively. When they choose silence, they're regulating their nervous system. They're activating the vagus nerve. They're entering deeper states of perception, but most empaths don't know this consciously. They simply feel that they need silence, that they get exhausted with too much conversation. They need time alone to recharge. Now you know why. It's not weakness. It's biological wisdom. Your body knows what it needs before your conscious mind even understands. And here's where things get even deeper. Carl Jung spoke about a process he called individuation. It's the journey of becoming who you truly are, of integrating all parts of yourself, of transcending the limited ego and accessing the deeper self. And Jung was very clear. This process requires silence. It requires introspection. It requires time away from the external world. Andrew Huberman never used the word individuation, but he spoke extensively about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to remodel itself, to create new connections, to change its structure based on experience. And research shows that the practice of silence and meditation promotes neuroplasticity. It increases the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which supports brain cell growth, longevity, and synaptic plasticity. Jung knew that silence transforms. Huberman has proven that silence remodels the brain. The empath who understands this has a huge advantage, because they're not just resting when they go silent. They are actively reconfiguring their neural networks. They are strengthening their capacity for perception. They are becoming more themselves. Now, pay attention to what I'm about to say, because this is something that could change your relationships forever. An empath's silence has a profound effect on other people, and it's not just because it's the absence of words. It's because an empath's silence carries a presence. When an empath falls silent after being hurt, other people feel it. They can't explain what they're feeling, but they feel it. They feel the weight, the depth, the significance. It's because when the empath goes silent, they activate that entire neurobiological system we discussed. Their vagus nerve regulates, their interoceptive awareness amplifies, and they begin to emanate a different frequency. Other nervous systems respond to this. We are biologically programmed to perceive emotional states in others. Our mirror neurons fire in response to what we perceive, and when an empath enters a state of deep, regulated silence, people around them feel it in their own bodies. And that's why the empath's silence is more powerful than 1,000 words. Words reach the conscious mind. The regulated silence of the empath reaches the nervous system directly. It goes beyond language, beyond logic. It hits the most primitive layers of the brain, those that process safety and threat. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote about projection. He said that we project onto others, that we see in them parts of ourselves that we don't recognize. But the empath in silence functions like a clean mirror. They're not projecting, they're just present. And that forces others to confront their own projections, their own shadows, their own unintegrated parts. That's uncomfortable for people who haven't done the internal work. That's why some people run from an empath's silence. They can't stand what they see in themselves when confronted with that silent presence. But for people who are on the path of self-discovery, the empath's silence is healing. It's like a tranquil lake where they can see their own reflection clearly for the first time. And that's what Jung meant when he spoke about the power of silence as a therapeutic tool. He often remained silent with his patients, let the silence work, because he understood that some things cannot be said. They can only be felt. Now I'm going back to that point I asked you to remember. Recall that I mentioned one aspect of silence that Jung discovered. Well, Jung realized that silence has a specific quality. He called it numinosity, a sacred presence, a sensation that something larger is happening. He described this in several of his writings. When he entered deep silence in Bollingen, he wasn't just resting, he was accessing what he called the self, the totality of the psyche, the center that transcends the individual ego. And that experience had a transformative quality. It wasn't just relaxation, it was an encounter with something greater. Now look at what neuroscience has discovered about this. Researchers studying advanced meditators have found that during states of deep silence, certain areas of the brain activate in unusual ways. The left inferior parietal lobe, responsible for the sense of body boundaries, reduces its activity. This creates a sensation of expansion, of dissolution of boundaries, of connection with something larger. Jung would call this a numinous experience. Huberman would call it an alteration in brain activation patterns. Different languages describing the same phenomenon. Deep silence doesn't just calm, it transforms the very perception of who you are. Empaths report this frequently. They go silent and feel that they expand, that their limits dissolve, that they can feel things that are beyond themselves. This isn't imagination, it's neurobiology. Their brains are literally operating differently during these states, and that's why the empath's silence carries so much weight. Because when they're in deep silence, they're accessing states of consciousness that few people experience. They're connected with something beyond the common ego, and that emanates from them. Other people feel it, even without understanding what they're feeling. There's another aspect that almost no one discusses. Jung extensively studied the relationship between the individual and the collective. He said that we're not just isolated individuals. We're connected through what he called the collective unconscious. Deep layers of the psyche that we share with all of humanity. The empath in silence accesses these layers. They're not just in contact with themselves. They're in contact with deeper patterns, archetypes, universal symbols. And in the same way that mirror neurons allow us to feel what others feel, these deeper connections allow the empath to access wisdom that transcends their individual experience. Huberman would describe this in terms of neural networks and brain connectivity. Jung would describe it in terms of archetypes and the collective unconscious, but both are pointing to the same reality. Silence opens doors, and the empath who knows how to use silence has access to dimensions of experience that remain closed to most. You've made it this far and you've understood the theory, the science, the validation. Now, let me give you the practical protocol. What you can do with this information to transform your life. First, recognize that your desire for silence isn't a weakness. It's a biological strength. Your nervous system knows that it needs silence to regulate. Stop apologizing for it. Stop thinking you should be more of an extrovert. Carl Jung was an introvert, and he was one of the most influential men of the 20th century. Second, use silence intentionally, not just when you're exhausted or running away. Choose moments of silence when you're feeling good. When you're feeling strong, use it as a practice. Those Vipassana meditators in the study had 11,000 hours of practice. You don't need that much, but you do need consistency. Third, combine silence with conscious breathing. Dr. Huberman taught us that 2 quick inhales followed by a long exhale immediately activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Do that during your moments of silence. Amplify the effect. Fourth, pay attention to your interoceptive awareness. When you're in silence, notice what you're feeling in your body. Where is the tension? Where is the relaxation? What sensations are arising? Dr. Huberman has explained that this interoceptive awareness can be fine-tuned. The more you practice, the more sensitive you become. Fifth, understand that your silence affects others. Use it with wisdom, not as a weapon, not as punishment, but as presence. As an invitation for others to also calm down, for others to also access their own depths. Sixth, when someone hurts you, don't respond immediately. Enter into silence. First, regulate your nervous system. Access your interoception. And only then, when you're centered, decide how to respond, or if to respond. Sometimes silence is the most powerful response. Seventh, create a physical space for your silence. Jung had Bollingen. You don't need a tower in Switzerland, but you do need a place where you can be in silence without interruptions, where you can turn off devices, where you can simply be. Eighth, use silence to access your intuition. Jung practiced active imagination in silence. He allowed images to emerge from the unconscious. You can do the same. Enter into silence, relax, and simply observe what arises, without judging, without directing, just observing. Ninth, remember that silence is a process of integration. Each time you enter into conscious silence, you're giving space for unintegrated parts of yourself to emerge. This can bring up difficult emotions, forgotten memories, shadowy parts. Don't run from it. This is how healing happens. 10th, trust the process. Jung took decades to develop his practice of silence. Dr. Huberman shows that neuroplastic changes take time. You're not going to transform your brain in one session. But each moment of conscious silence is creating new connections, strengthening new patterns, reconfiguring your neurobiology. You've made it this far. You now know something that most people will never understand. You know that your silence isn't empty. It's full of power, of presence, of transformation. Jung spent his entire life studying the psyche. He dove into the depths of the unconscious, confronted shadows that would have destroyed less courageous people. And in the end, what he valued most was silence. His moments at Bollingen, his hours of solitary introspection, his days without words. Dr. Huberman spent decades in Stanford laboratories. He measured, quantified, analyzed. He used the most advanced technologies available to understand how the brain works. And what he discovered validates everything that Jung intuited. Silence changes the brain. Interoception connects mind and body. The vagus nerve is the communication channel that unites everything. You are an empath. You feel what others don't feel, perceive what others don't perceive. This is a gift, but it's also a responsibility, because now you know that your silence has power, power to transform yourself, power to affect others, power to access levels of consciousness that most people will never know. The question now is simple. What are you going to do with that power? Are you going to continue using silence only as an escape? Or are you going to start using it as the tool for transformation that it really is? Jung once said that whoever looks outside dreams, whoever looks inside awakens. Dr. Huberman has proven that controlling your biology is the key to controlling your life. The synthesis is clear. Awaken within, control without, and use silence as the bridge between the two worlds. Your silence is more powerful than 1,000 words. Jung revealed it. Huberman validated it. Now you know it. The transformation begins in the next moment you choose to be silent. Not out of fear, not out of exhaustion, but out of power, out of wisdom, out of a conscious choice to enter a state that reconfigures your brain, regulates your nervous system, and changes the reality around you. That's the secret that true empaths carry. That's the power that few understand. And now you're part of that group. Use it wisely. I produce this content with a lot of research and care because I know it can transform lives. If you felt the value of what you received today, consider supporting this work through Super Thanks. Every support isn't just financial. It's you saying, continue revealing what few have the courage to share. It's you becoming an active part of this mission to unite the wisdom of Jung with the science of Huberman. When you click on the golden heart, you're funding the next revelation. You are not a passive spectator. You are a truth seeker with me. Comment down below, team silence versus team words. How do you use your silence? As a tool of power or as an escape? I want to know your experience. And if you know someone who needs to understand the power of silence, send this video to that person. Because sometimes the right message arrives at the right time. And maybe you're the messenger who will change someone's life today.